The war between Russia and Ukraine has evolved into a conflict with far-reaching implications, stretching well beyond Europe and threatening to destabilize the Pacific region. Recent developments, including North Korea's deployment of nearly 12,000 troops to support Russia's war effort, have raised alarms in Northeast Asia, a region where geopolitical tensions already run high. Among those most concerned is China, a regional heavyweight and a global competitor to the United States. For Beijing, the growing Russia-North Korea alliance presents a strategic challenge with potentially destabilizing consequences for the region and beyond. North Korea's contribution to Russia's war effort is both significant and unprecedented. Reports indicate that nearly 12,000 North Korean troops have been sent to aid Moscow, including 500 elite special forces personnel. Already, around 8,000 of these troops are actively engaged in combat in the Kursk region, marking North Korea's direct involvement in the conflict. This escalation is a troubling development for China, which views any broadening of the war's scope into the Pacific as a direct threat to its security interests. The implications of this alliance are profound. A closer military partnership between Moscow and Pyongyang could destabilize Northeast Asia, a region vital to global trade and economic stability. Moreover, North Korea's involvement complicates China's long-standing goal of maintaining a peaceful and stable Korean peninsula, as it risks drawing international attention and increasing military activity near China's borders. China has long maintained a delicate balance in its relationships with Russia and North Korea. While Beijing is officially aligned with Moscow through an unlimited partnership and has historically supported Pyongyang, the growing military cooperation between these two nations poses a direct challenge to China's regional strategy. Beijing fears that this new axis could provoke further instability in the region and undermine its broader strategic interests. China's concerns have been amplified by calls from the United States and South Korea for Beijing to leverage its influence over both Russia and North Korea. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin recently engaged with their South Korean counterparts in discussions urging China to act as a stabilizing force. At a press conference in Washington, Blinken emphasized that the global community expects Beijing to prevent further escalation of the Russia-North Korea alliance. In response, China has begun to cautiously address the issue. Liu Penghu, a spokesperson for the China Embassy in Washington, reiterated Beijing's commitment to peace talks and a political solution to the Ukraine conflict. However, despite its public commitment to diplomacy, China's actions reveal a deeper unease. Analysts suggest that Beijing is increasingly frustrated by Pyongyang's alignment with Moscow and views it as a destabilizing factor in the region. China's position on the Russia-North Korea alliance is fraught with complexities. Shi Hong, an international relations expert at Renmin University, argues that the partnership between Moscow and Pyongyang runs counter to Beijing's long-standing goal of a peaceful and stable Korean peninsula. He predicts that China's warnings against this alliance will become more assertive as the situation develops. However, China's measured response thus far has puzzled some observers. Dennis Wilder, a senior fellow at Georgetown University, described Beijing's initial silence as surprising, suggesting that President Xi Jinping faces a delicate balancing act. Xi's personal relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin complicates matters, as Beijing seeks to avoid alienating Moscow while simultaneously managing its economic and strategic ties with the West. Wilder also highlighted China's economic vulnerabilities, which limit its capacity to act decisively. With China's economy under pressure, Xi cannot afford to risk further alienation from Europe and the United States. As a result, Beijing's response to the Russia-North Korea alliance reflects a mix of frustration, panic, and strategic hesitation. China's concerns extend beyond immediate regional stability. Analysts speculate that Beijing may not have been informed in advance of Pyongyang's decision to send troops to support Russia, raising questions about its influence over North Korea. This lack of coordination underscores a growing fear in Beijing that Moscow could overshadow China as Pyongyang's primary partner. Historically, China has been North Korea's most important ally, providing economic aid and political support in exchange for Pyongyang's loyalty. However, Russia's recent moves to deepen military ties with North Korea risk upsetting this dynamic. If Moscow gains greater influence over Pyongyang, it could undermine Beijing's efforts to maintain its leadership role in Northeast Asia and complicate its strategic calculations. Furthermore, the evolving Russia-North Korea alliance could draw China into a broader confrontation with the West. As the United States and its allies increase pressure on Beijing to rein in its partners, China faces the challenge of balancing its relationships with Moscow and Pyongyang while avoiding direct conflict with the West. The deployment of North Korean troops to the Russian war front marks a turning point in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, with implications that reach far beyond Europe. For China, the growing alliance between Moscow and Pyongyang represents a direct challenge to its strategic goals in Northeast Asia and its broader foreign policy objectives. As Beijing navigates this complex situation, its decisions will have far-reaching consequences for the region's stability and the global balance of power. The coming months will be critical in determining how China responds to this new reality and whether it can successfully manage the delicate balance between supporting its allies and maintaining its own strategic interests. The Russia-Ukraine war has led to unexpected shifts in global alliances, with North Korea emerging as a significant supporter of Moscow's war effort. This development has put China, a traditional ally of both Russia and North Korea, in a precarious position. The growing cooperation between Pyongyang and the Kremlin has forced Beijing to recalibrate its foreign policy, balancing its commitments to its allies with the broader goal of regional stability and its own strategic interests. Recent reports of North Korea deploying troops to support Russia in its war against Ukraine have created ripples in the geopolitical landscape. While Pyongyang has remained silent on these allegations, Russian President Vladimir Putin indirectly confirmed them during the recent BRICS summit, neither denying nor addressing the issue outright. According to reports, thousands of North Korean soldiers, including elite units, have been dispatched to bolster Russian forces, raising alarms among international observers and neighboring countries alike. China, normally North Korea's most important ally in the region, is watching these developments with increasing concern. The deployment of North Korean troops to Ukraine not only deepens the European conflict, but also risks destabilizing the Indo-Pacific. For Beijing, this could mean managing two geopolitical crises simultaneously, an outcome that would strain its resources and diplomatic efforts. China's unease became apparent at the BRICS summit, where Beijing called for a de-escalation of tensions in Ukraine, particularly in light of North Korea's involvement. Chinese officials described the deployment of Pyongyang's forces as a destabilizing factor, reflecting Beijing's desire to avoid being entangled in a broader confrontation. While China has tried to position itself as a mediator in the Ukraine conflict, its perceived alignment with Moscow has drawn criticism, particularly from the West. Beijing's reaction to North Korea's actions serves as a warning not only to Pyongyang, but also to Russia. China's interests lie in maintaining stability in Northeast Asia, avoiding unnecessary provocations, and preventing the US and its allies from strengthening their military presence in the region. The trilateral security cooperation between the United States, Japan, and South Korea has already intensified, applying additional pressure on Beijing regarding Taiwan and the South China Sea. North Korea's aggressive stance, coupled with its support for Russia, risks exacerbating these tensions. In addition to its involvement in Ukraine, North Korea has escalated military activities near the demilitarized zone, deploying troops and threatening South Korea with retaliation. These actions are seen as a response to alleged South Korean incursions into North Korean airspace, further straining the fragile peace on the Korean peninsula. For China, these moves complicate its position. While Beijing supports Pyongyang as a historical ally, it recognizes that such provocations threaten regional stability and could trigger a stronger US presence in the area. China's economic aid to North Korea, accounting for nearly half of Pyongyang's foreign aid, grants Beijing considerable leverage over Kim Jong-un's regime. However, Pyongyang's deepening ties with Moscow create a difficult balancing act for China. Analysts believe that China's recent warnings to North Korea indicate a desire to curb its aggression, particularly towards South Korea, and to limit its involvement in the European conflict. China's influence extends beyond North Korea. Beijing has significant leverage over Moscow, as Russia's war effort relies heavily on Chinese economic and industrial support. Jonathan Ward, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, argues that Russia's war in Ukraine would likely collapse without Chinese backing. This dependence positions Beijing as a potential arbiter, capable of influencing Moscow's actions indirectly. China's strategic interest lies in maintaining a balance. On the one hand, it cannot afford to alienate Russia, a key partner in countering Western influence. On the other hand, Beijing must prevent the Russia-North Korea alliance from undermining its own geopolitical goals. The risk of alienating Western powers, particularly Europe, further complicates Xi Jinping's calculus. With China's economy under strain, the government is cautious about provoking additional economic or diplomatic fallout. The Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance between China and North Korea, signed in 1961, adds another layer of complexity to the situation. Under the treaty, China is obligated to provide military and other assistance to North Korea in the event of armed conflict. This raises questions about whether Beijing could be drawn into a broader confrontation if Pyongyang continues its aggressive actions, both in Ukraine and on the Korean Peninsula. China's historical ties to North Korea, while once a source of solidarity, now present a challenge in an era of shifting alliances. Pyongyang's growing dependence on Russia threatens to diminish China's influence over its neighbor, potentially altering the power dynamics in Northeast Asia. For Beijing, preserving its leadership role in the region is critical to its long-term strategic objectives. The growing cooperation between the United States, Japan, and South Korea adds another dimension to China's concerns. This trilateral alliance has strengthened in response to North Korea's provocations and the broader threat posed by China's activities in the South China Sea and around Taiwan. The alignment of these three nations not only bolsters their collective security, but also serves as a counterbalance to China's ambitions in the region. For Beijing, the North Korea-Russia alliance exacerbates these challenges, forcing China to navigate an increasingly complex geopolitical environment. Analysts argue that while China may issue warnings to Pyongyang and Moscow, its ability to enforce these directives is limited by the competing pressures of its alliances and its desire to avoid direct confrontation with the West. The alliance between North Korea and Russia has created a multifaceted dilemma for China, straining its relationships with both allies and adversaries. As Pyongyang deepens its involvement in the Ukraine conflict and escalates tensions on the Korean Peninsula, Beijing faces the challenge of preserving regional stability while maintaining its own strategic interests. China's responses in the coming months will be critical in shaping the balance of power in Northeast Asia and beyond. Whether through diplomatic pressure, economic leverage, or strategic maneuvering, Beijing must navigate a path that minimizes conflict while safeguarding its position as a regional leader. The stakes are high, not only for China, but for the broader international community, as the implications of this evolving alliance extend far beyond the current conflict. The deepening alliance between Russia and North Korea, combined with ongoing U.S. military support for Ukraine, has added new dimensions to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, with global implications. Amid these shifts, China finds itself navigating a precarious balance between historical alliances, its strategic interests, and the need to avoid escalation. These developments highlight the complex interplay of diplomacy, military strategy, and domestic politics as the world watches the evolving conflict unfold. China's position on the Russia-North Korea alliance remains ambivalent. Historically tied to Pyongyang through the Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance, signed in 1961, Beijing now appears cautious about reinforcing military obligations outlined in this Cold War-era pact. Analysts suggest that China is reluctant to revisit the dynamics of the 1950s, particularly the Korean War, which drained its resources and strained international relations. Despite Beijing's economic support, estimated to account for nearly half of North Korea's foreign aid, Pyongyang has chosen to assert its independence through actions that align more closely with Moscow. This includes the controversial deployment of North Korean troops to Russia, a move viewed as an effort to strengthen its global profile, challenge U.S.-led alliances in the Pacific, and showcase its commitment to Moscow amidst the Ukraine conflict. In response to mounting international criticism and under the diplomatic spotlight, North Korea launched an intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM, into the East Sea of Japan on October 31st. This provocative act followed strong condemnations by U.S. and South Korean defense ministers over Pyongyang's troop deployment to Russia. Notably, the missile's flight duration surpassed previous tests, showcasing an advancement in North Korea's missile capabilities. Observers speculate that this launch served multiple purposes. On the surface, it appeared to signal Pyongyang's displeasure with international scrutiny over its actions. More strategically, the launch may have been an attempt to divert global attention from the Russia-Ukraine war, while simultaneously positioning itself as a key player on the geopolitical stage ahead of the upcoming U.S. presidential elections. The outcome of these elections could influence the trajectory of the conflict, as well as the extent of North Korea's involvement in support of Russia. The United States responded to these developments with a combination of military aid and strategic warnings. White House National Security spokesman John Kirby recently stated that North Korean troops fighting in Ukraine would be considered legitimate targets for Ukrainian forces. This statement underscores the Biden administration's firm stance on holding Moscow and its allies accountable for prolonging the conflict. In tandem with its warnings, the U.S. has accelerated military assistance to Ukraine. The Pentagon recently announced a $425 million military aid package, part of the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which allows the rapid transfer of defense equipment from Department of Defense stockpiles without requiring congressional approval. This latest package includes a range of advanced weaponry and supplies essential for sustaining Ukraine's defensive operations. Key items in the package include Stinger missiles, HIMARS ammunition, NASAMS shells, Javelin anti-tank missiles, and unmanned aerial vehicles. Additionally, artillery rounds, medical supplies, and small arms further enhance Ukraine's battlefield resilience. Since Russia's invasion in February 2022, the United States has provided over $64.1 billion in military aid to Ukraine, solidifying its role as Kiev's largest international supporter. Secretary of State Antony Blinken emphasized that this aid reflects the U.S. commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty and security. He also hinted at the administration's intent to exhaust all remaining resources approved by Congress before President Biden's term concludes. The timing of these measures coincides with domestic political considerations, as the Biden administration aims to bolster its foreign policy achievements amid bipartisan debates over continued support for Ukraine. The U.S. presidential elections in 2024 loom large over the future of the Russia-Ukraine war and North Korea's involvement. Republican candidate Donald Trump, during a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in New York this past September, claimed he could negotiate a mutually beneficial resolution to the conflict if elected. Trump's statements suggest a potential shift in U.S. foreign policy priorities, raising questions about the sustainability of current levels of military aid to Ukraine under a Republican administration. For now, the Biden administration remains focused on countering Russian aggression and deterring allies like North Korea from deepening their involvement. The stakes are high. A reduction in U.S. military support could embolden Moscow and its partners, while continued aid risks escalating tensions with adversaries like China, which is already grappling with increased pressure from U.S.-led alliances in the Pacific. China's reaction to North Korea's troop deployment and missile tests reflects its broader strategic dilemma. While Beijing is reluctant to alienate Pyongyang or Moscow, it also recognizes the risks of being drawn into a larger confrontation. The trilateral alliance between the U.S., Japan, and South Korea, which has strengthened in response to North Korea's provocations, adds to Beijing's concerns, particularly regarding Taiwan and the South China Sea. China's leverage over North Korea and Russia remains significant, with its economic and industrial support serving as lifelines for both regimes. However, Beijing must tread carefully to avoid antagonizing the West, especially as its economy faces challenges. This precarious balancing act underscores the complexities of China's foreign policy, where historical alliances and modern realities often clash. The Russia-Ukraine war has evolved into a geopolitical flashpoint, drawing in actors from across the globe. North Korea's deepening ties with Russia and its provocative missile launches signal a desire to assert itself as a significant player, even as these actions heighten tensions in the Pacific. For the United States, the focus remains on supporting Ukraine while deterring adversaries like Pyongyang from escalating the conflict further. China, caught between its historical commitments and strategic interests, faces a complex set of challenges. As it navigates its relationships with North Korea and Russia, Beijing's actions will have far-reaching implications for regional stability and the global balance of power. The coming months, shaped by developments in Ukraine, the US presidential elections, and North Korea's continued provocations, will be pivotal in determining the trajectory of these interconnected conflicts. The ongoing geopolitical tensions surrounding the Russia-Ukraine war have widened into a broader contest of influence, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. For China, the United States' deepening military cooperation with South Korea and its extensive support for Ukraine pose significant strategic challenges. The addition of North Korean troops to the Ukrainian battlefield further complicates this landscape, raising the stakes for Beijing as it navigates an increasingly volatile regional and global environment. China views the United States' continued military aid to Ukraine and its growing defense collaborations in the Pacific with mounting concern. Washington's robust support for Ukraine, which has shifted from non-lethal aid to the provision of advanced weaponry, reflects a broader commitment to containing authoritarian powers globally. Simultaneously, U.S. military policies in the Indo-Pacific, particularly its strengthened partnerships with South Korea, Japan, and Australia, signal an expanded strategic focus that includes countering Beijing's influence in the region. South Korea's evolving stance on Ukraine has also caught China's attention. Seoul, which initially limited its support to non-lethal aid, is now contemplating sending defensive and potentially offensive weapons to Kyiv. Such a move would mark a significant shift in South Korea's foreign policy and underscore the deepening alignment between Western and Indo-Pacific democracies. For Beijing, this integration of Europe's security issues into the Indo-Pacific presents a direct challenge to its regional narrative, which has long sought to frame Western powers as outsiders in Asia. The deployment of thousands of North Korean troops to assist Russia in Ukraine further heightens China's concerns. This development not only intensifies the European conflict, but also risks destabilizing the Korean Peninsula and the wider Indo-Pacific. Pyongyang's involvement in Ukraine adds another layer of complexity to regional dynamics, particularly for nations like South Korea and Japan, which view North Korea's actions as a direct threat to their security. Compounding these fears is the potential for deeper military cooperation between Russia and North Korea. Analysts warn that Moscow could offer advanced nuclear technology to Pyongyang in exchange for troops and arms, accelerating an already precarious arms race in the region. For Beijing, this scenario would be particularly unwelcome, as it undermines efforts to maintain stability on the Korean Peninsula and could provoke an expanded U.S. military presence near China's borders. Despite these challenges, Beijing remains a pivotal player in shaping the trajectory of the Russia-North Korea alliance. Analysts suggest that China may be tacitly allowing North Korea's arms and personnel shipments to Ukraine to ease pressure on Russia and prevent Moscow from relying on Beijing for direct military assistance. By turning a blind eye, China avoids direct entanglement in the conflict while keeping Russia dependent on its economic and political support. However, this strategy is not without risks. China must navigate a delicate balance to avoid being perceived as complicit in actions that escalate global tensions. At the same time, Beijing retains significant leverage over both Moscow and Pyongyang. As a key economic lifeline for North Korea and an indispensable ally for Russia, China has the power to influence their behavior if it chooses to do so. China's primary concern remains maintaining its influence in the Pacific and positioning itself as a counterbalance to the United States. By framing itself as a peacekeeper, Beijing seeks to discredit US-led alliances and portray Western involvement in Asia as unnecessary and destabilizing. However, the growing integration of Indo-Pacific and European security issues complicates this narrative. The strengthening trilateral alliance between the US, South Korea, and Japan highlights a concerted effort to counter China's influence, further pressuring Beijing to recalibrate its strategy. Ultimately, Beijing may seek to curtail Russia and North Korea's provocative actions, particularly if they risk drawing unwanted Western attention to the region. While Moscow and Pyongyang have forged closer ties, both countries remain strategically aligned with Beijing. This dependence ensures that China can exert considerable influence over their actions if necessary, reinforcing its position as the dominant power in this tripartite relationship. China's response to the shifting dynamics of the Russia-Ukraine conflict and its implications for the Indo-Pacific reflects its broader strategic challenges. As the United States strengthens its alliances and expands its military commitments, Beijing must carefully balance its support for Russia and North Korea with its desire to maintain regional stability and avoid direct confrontation with the West. The coming months will be critical for Beijing as it navigates this complex geopolitical landscape, whether through leveraging its economic and political influence or recalibrating its regional strategy. China's actions will have far-reaching implications for the global balance of power. In the end, Beijing's ability to manage these competing priorities will determine its success in maintaining its leadership in the Pacific and beyond.